Maybe one of the best days in my house and likely your house too. It's the start of the NHL season for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They host Ottawa tonight. We have a special treat. Eduardo Encina, who covers the Tampa Bay Lightning for the Tampa Bay Times, is going to join us in just a minute to talk about everything Tampa Bay Lightning, the latest on, well, you name it. Andrei Vasilevskiy. Is the power play going to be better, as Nikita Kucherov says it needs to be? So much to talk about, including their rivalry with Florida and where that is headed. So we have Eduardo Encina here in just a minute. First, I want to just touch a little bit on the Bucks. They were at practice on Wednesday. It was a walkthrough, much like it was a week ago. So why change the formula if it works, right? But part of the problem is they have so many injured players, and you can add to that list, unfortunately. On Monday, Todd Bowles said it looked like they were doing okay. He didn't have any real new information. Well, there is new information now. Cornerback Zion McCallum had his left hand in a cast, his left arm in a sling on Wednesday. It was a walkthrough practice. So, we had very little time to watch them from the portion that was open to the media, but clearly he was not practicing. Perhaps maybe more ominous in a sense is receiver Chris Godwin did not practice due to what is called a fibula injury. Now, he was limping after the game on Sunday, and of course he had the dislocated ankle, this fracture in his leg. I imagine that the way it's been sort of described to us is that he's very sore, but hopefully there's nothing more broken or anything like that. I haven't heard that part of it. But Chris Godwin, of course, they're thin at receiver, and they can't afford to really lose him. But McCollum would be a big loss, obviously, although Todd Bowles said that he's still in play. He said he got a thumb procedure done. Now he did not necessarily get hurt in this game. I think it was the previous game, and he went out there and played. He said he's got a thumb procedure done. We'll see how he feels towards the end of the week, and it's going to be touch and go. Now, they've been without some defensive backs. The good news, I guess you would say, is that Jamel Dean and Christian Isian, those guys were limited. They at least practiced a little bit. You're still waiting on Benjamin Morrison, I think, to get back out there. So it might be one down and two more up. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. So a lot of injuries. Obviously, Bucky Irving is out. Mike Evans is going to be out this week, but the 49ers have damn near as many injuries as the Bucks do. So it'll be probably Friday before we know exactly what's going on with these guys, especially on defense. And like I said, this is going to be one of those games where somebody's got to will themselves to win, because they're all playing shorthanded at this point. And you can imagine 2 4-1 teams. Not sure if Mac Jones is going to start. Brock Purdy. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. So a lot of things up in the air as we get on through the week. We'll keep you updated in the Tampa Bay Times and on TampaBay.com. Hey, before we get to Eduardo, we'll remind you guys, go see our friends at Breitling Boutique International Plaza Mall. That's where you're going to find the beautiful Swiss watches. The Breitling Company has been in business for over 140 years. They've been at International Plaza Mall for more than 5 years. Now, you go to the center of the mall, second floor. That's where you're going to find the Breitling Boutique. Great customer service. They're used to dealing with all kinds of celebrities and athletes. They're going to treat you like the celebrity that you are. Go in there, spend some time, have a drink, find out about the beautiful timepieces. For the men, it's the Chronomats watches that they're known for, the Navatimers, women's watches as well. For your wife, your girlfriend, these are sports watches. They are durable, they're beautiful, and she gets to pick from an array of different wristbands. And while supplies last, and that's important, the Breitling Company is doing something special with the NFL, celebrating their 104th year anniversary. 32 teams, 32 different team watches. That's right. They're all unique in their own appearance. These are Chronomat watches. They have the team colors on the face of the watch, the logos. If you go to Breitling Boutique, they had a couple in the window. I think I saw a Jaguars, a Buccaneers watch. These are things, the collector's items that you have to have. It is Breitling Boutique International Mall. Please let them know that you heard about it right here on Sports Day Tampa Bay. All right, we got a special treat today. The Tampa Bay Lightning begin their season against Ottawa, and we have Eduardo Encina, who covers the Lightning for the Tampa Bay Times, my good friend, Buddy Kopp. Welcome. Good to talk to you. It's been a minute, and here we are for another long hockey season that is ahead of you. Hopefully, one that will go well into the postseason. But let's start with just like the Bolts and where they are right now. And we can go backwards a little bit too, the way the season ended. But in general,
Mhm.
Eduardo, like they decided to basically bring back essentially the same team, and I would guess that would mean that they don't think they're far off from being a Stanley Cup contender again.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's great to hear you, Buddy Cop, because it's been way too long.
Yeah,
I've
man, a
I
long
put out
time.
some APBs for you, but
I was 1040. Sorry.
yeah, but anyway, yeah, I mean, I do think that they really like what the team that they had last year in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. They made some massive improvements, over in the previous offseason. Obviously, getting Jake Gensel was a big thing. Obviously, they said goodbye to Steven Stamkos, but I think they accomplished their focus that offseason, which was to really get a lot better defensively and improve their 5-on-5. And I think you saw that over the course of the season. Like they were a 100-point team, last season, and the East is so tough that like you can look at a lot of different places where if things had kind of gone their way, or one guy's not hurt or something like that, that things might have gone differently against the Panthers and in that first round. But at the end of the day, I think what you see when you look at this team is a group that is really grateful for the fact that they did keep everyone together for the most part,
Right.
and that the front office and Julian Breezeball have that faith that this is a group that you know does have what it takes to get back into a Stanley Cup picture. And but at the same time knowing that you know having lost in the first round the past 3 years, isn't good enough. And I think, we've heard that a lot in the room. We've heard a lot from, the coaches, from the front office and everything, that, there is a standard here, that this team set, a very high bar that they set when they were winning Stanley Cups and going to the Stanley Cup final. And, the past 3 years, they haven't nearly met that. So I sense in that room, like a lot of hunger, a lot of determination, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. And I think that's all going to do well for them. I think that they do know kind of their weaknesses in a lot of ways. I think I've written about it a lot over in the preseason. As good as they were in the regular season, a lot of categories. They were a top 5 team and goals for, goals against, power play numbers, PK, 5-on-5, everything you want to be. But that kind of we didn't see that in the playoffs. And especially the power play, and especially playing the Florida Panthers, which is a team that, as we all know, they know very well and is going to give you power play opportunities. In the past couple of years, they just haven't been able to really take advantage of those. And the Panthers play a very I don't know the right way to call it, but they play a unique style of hockey that's worked for them the past couple of years. I mean, some of it has been the Lightning blueprint from the past, but they this year they really kind of need to figure that out. And I think this is a very important year for that. Who knows if they run into the Panthers again in the first or second round, but I think you've got to look at it as thinking that eventually you're going to have to face them. And I think Andrei Vasilevskiy put it really well on media day. And I know it's cliche, but if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And I think that's the way they look at this season. And there's a lot of optimism, but there's a lot of realism in the fact that where they stand and where they need to be, and that there is a at this point a gap that they need to make up.
It's a great point, and I want to get into Florida. I'm going to do that in a minute because obviously that is sort of the hump they have to get over. And quite frankly,
Mhm.
Florida had to learn how to beat the Lightning to make it to a
For
Stanley
sure.
Cup as well. So it's kind of a push pull with that. I did want to ask you about some players, in particular Jack Finley and Max Crozier. Um, so tell me what their roles will be, why you think
Yeah.
they're on this team, and just how they can impact them.
Yes, I mean, like we said, I mean, there aren't very many roster spots there.
Right, right.
Bringing back most of the guys. The one real guy they brought in the offseason is Pontus Holmberg. He was he got bottom 6 guy. Does really tough guy to play against. Really kind of fits. He plays well in the corners. He's a really good guy with the puck, and he's going to be. I think right now he's probably going to be their fourth line center on opening night. But outside of that, I think they looked at as like the uh, the other guys that were going to supplement the roster were going to come from within, and Finley and Crozier are two of those guys. And it's really interesting because neither one of them is necessarily super heralded. Finley was a second round pick, a few years back, but he dealt with a lot of injuries, multiple surgeries to his shoulder. Just, past 3 years, he just hasn't been healthy during training camp. And this has been the first year that he's really, has had all of that kind of stuff behind him. And it's very clear that Julian Breezeball thinks very highly of him. He's mentioned him multiple times over the past, calendar year in terms of a guy who he thinks he can contribute. And he's 6'6", so you can't really, you can't teach that, you can't coach that. So,
can't coach the size.
Yeah. and he's a guy who, does some of the little things well. Plays well for the net front. In the net front, he's a really good faceoff guy, and I think that's something they need. He can contribute on the PK. That's something he can slot into. So he's a guy who, when you came to camp, you kind of saw, hey, this guy could crack the lineup, but he definitely had to earn it by showing the team that he was, he was going to help them win now. And I think he's done that. Obviously, the big question with him, I think, going forward is really always going to be the health. Can he handle, the grind of an 82-game season? And that's what we were seeing. You don't know that until you find out, right? So I think that's the thing with him. Max Crozier is such an interesting guy because he was one of these guys who was a draft pick, and he played, I think 3-4 years of college. He turned pro pretty, as an older guy, 22, 23, and he spent a couple of years in Syracuse, and he was talking about this, I think when I talked to him the other day, he was saying it was like his third or fourth pro season. So, he's kind of an older guy, but with defensemen, especially younger defensemen who are coming into the league, like it's almost like you don't want to notice them, because if you're noticing them too much, they're making mistakes, and that's kind of the way Crozier plays. He's one of these guys who's just steady with the puck, but I think he's going to fit in on that right side as kind of, right. I mean, he's going to play tomorrow night because of JJ Mosier being suspended. But
Mosier, yeah.
When Mosier comes back, I think he'll kind of slot in as that, seventh D, which is a really important spot for them. Obviously, they lost, a Nick Perbix in the offseason. So that he's another guy who, going into camp, you kind of thought maybe he had a spot, but he obviously had to earn it. And I saw him play last year in Syracuse when I made a trip up there, and he's a guy who, he already has actually like NHL experience to a good degree. He's played in the playoffs and stuff like that. So it's not like this is all kind of new to him. Finley's a little bit different. He played in one game when it was an 11th hour kind of call up in Boston in January. But Crozier's played hockey, and he has a really good connection with Emil Lilleberg a couple years ago in Syracuse. They were defensive pairing partners. So whether that is a thing that plays out, we'll see. But I just think Crozier's a guy he's steady, and that's kind of what you need. I think that was a big difference last year with the D-Corps than the year before is, and there's a lot of things that go into it. Obviously, I think Ryan McDonough coming back was a huge part of it. He just sends calm back there, and that's the thing, like calm, steady, don't notice him that much, get the puck out of the zone, and don't turn the puck over and get yourselves in bad situations in your own end. So I think Crozier fits that. And again, he had to earn the spot, but these are two guys who are internal guys who they drafted and developed, and not necessarily guys who, you looked at several years ago and said, okay, I can guarantee that these guys are going to be NHL contributors, but they're really kind of, success stories for the player development department, because, they've both are here now, and, they're really going to be counted on, in big moments for this team.
Yeah, they haven't missed on many guys that they developed and brought up through Syracuse, and I think that's a testament to their organization for sure. No conversation with the Lightning can be had without mentioning Andrei Vasilevskiy, and I guess it always kind of begins and ends a little bit with how healthy is he, right? And how many games do we think he'll play this season? Remember a couple of years ago, he had the injury, the workout regimen changed, and he changed it back, and didn't begin the preseason this year. So where is he right now, do you think?
Yeah, so I talked to Vasy a couple of days ago, just on the side, and I mean, there has been this, it hasn't been a normal preseason for him, obviously. He I think the second day of camp, he came off the ice. He didn't participate in a scrimmage. I think the next 9 days he missed. And no matter what, and especially like you mentioned, given what happened a couple years ago during the preseason, that's going to put up red flags, and it did. So, then the questions are, with Coop and everyone, it's like, okay, is he going to be ready? And I don't think that at any point that they really questioned whether he would be ready, but I think there's still kind of a sense that it's still a little bit up in the air
Mm-hmm.
when we go into the season. He played one game, one preseason game, and that game on Saturday in Sunrise. I honestly don't think that was a game that really was the way that the Lightning went into that game. Was really built for him to get the reps and the work that he needed to, because I think they were determined to do other things.
Yeah.
But so I think that was a little tough on Vasy. I don't think he really looked great. I think he looked a little slow. I think his timing was off. But just looking at him in practice today, I think he looks better. But I think this is going to be one thing where, and there's a reason they're kind of carrying three goaltenders right now.
Yeah.
And they really like the guy they picked off of waivers. Phoenix Copley. But at the same time, I think that over the next week or so, you're really kind of trying to really decide that you really feel good about Vasy's health right now, and just because he hasn't had that work, and a couple of years ago when he came back from that surgery, he did struggle, and a big part of the narrative there was, well, he didn't have the preparation, he didn't have the preseason and stuff like that. And he really hasn't had much of that this year either. Now, having said that, like talking to Vasy, he says that you know 1 week not being on the ice is not going to take away from the 2.5 months that he spent this off season working to get into game shape, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I can I completely trust Andrei Vasilevskiy when he says that his preparation is there, because I'm not one to doubt that, because I know how hard he works. But at the end of the day, he hasn't really seen pucks, and he hasn't really seen that kind of gain speed. And I think you could see that on Saturday. So, you know, I'd like to see a little bit of that more comfort in the net, tomorrow night and the first few games. Now, having said that, next week they've got a couple, back to backs, so he won't play in a couple of those games. So when you look at you know his early season here, the first couple of weeks, he's probably only going to play at most for the next 6 games. So there is some rest there. There's some time for them to get acclimated to everything. And he's a guy who also takes those work days when he's not playing very seriously. But again, at the end of the day, he's in his early 30s now. We know the workload he's seen. We know that he's played 60 some games the past 4 years. We know he played 84 games in the playoffs during that 3 year stretch of them going to the finals every year. So at some point you've got to think that it does catch up with him. But having said that, he knows that he's a much different guy, and he's got to prepare a much different way than maybe 5 years ago when he was in his mid 20s. And I think he's gotten that over the past few years. He's understood it. But I think no matter what, the success of this team, begins and ends with number 88. So it's always going to be kind of a focal point in terms of what I look at covering this team, and seeing whether he's right and whether he's healthy, both physically, and mentally in preparation for the season.
No question, Eduardo Andrei Vasilevskiy is going to be a big part of the Bolts' success, and he always will be. So hopefully he gets the health issues aside from him. I wanted to ask you about Oliver Borkstrand and Yanni Gourde. Gourde did not feel like he was completely healthy when he got here last year. What if those two guys play a full season? What kind of impact could they have?
Yeah, no, I think the Lightning are banking on it. That having those guys, a full season here and healthy is going to be big. And I mean, obviously, and Yanni wasn't 100% when he came back.
Right.
I mean, I think when he came back, he was just coming back from, I think, a groin injury that kept him out a couple months. And to be honest, he didn't have his legs. Even at that point, he was still kind of building up. So, and then when if he starts getting better, and then Bjorkstrand goes out, late in the season too with that injury. So it'll be good to get them back on the ice together. I think they have they played together in Seattle. They played on the same line together. I think that they know each other well. I think Bjorkstrand is a very important piece, and Gourde is as well. I mean, I think we're going to see Yanni as kind of that third center right now, especially as Nick Paul's hurt to start the season. And I don't know if they'll be able to reinvent that third line from a couple years ago, but having a healthy Yanni there and knowing what he can do, and him being signed, and him knowing that he's going to be here long term, I think all that helps the situation. I think Bjorkstrand is honestly one of the most important players on this team in a lot of ways. he's going to play a middle six role, but at the same time, I think the most important part of what he might do is going to be on that power play. I think that
Mm-hmm.
he's a guy who at this point is probably going to sit in that bumper spot that Braden Point had sat in for a long time. I think Pointer's probably going to go out to the left side where they're really still kind of looking for a solution to fill Steven Stamkos' spot there, and it's a little bit different. I think the power play is a little bit different now, and for Bjorkstrand, hopefully he can be the guy, the piece that's been missing last year. I think last year they were trying to figure out how to replace Stamkos. I think they tried a lot of different guys. I think it's super hard to try to be that guy because you look around and you're the other dude who's in there with Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, Victor Hedman, and Jake Getzel. And
Right.
I think sometimes they put guys in there and they were afraid to shoot. They wanted to overpass. The Lightning power play kind of overpasses anyway every once in a while too. So I think you have a guy with confidence there who knows how to play that bumper spot. Great catch and shoot guy. Now the other end part of that is you kind of take Braden Point out of his strength because he's one of the best in the bumper. So you're kind of a little bit
Yeah.
robbing Peter, pay Paul. But and then the power play is also a little bit different with Gensel there. Gensel's not your typical net front guy that they've had. They've had guys like Alex Killorn, Nick Paul, guys there who are play the net front, big guys. Cause traffic, cause a lot of stuff in front of the net. Whereas Gensel's more of a guy who kind of moves around. He's just knows where to be. He cleans up a lot of pucks. He can handle the puck really well and distribute from behind the net. So there's a little bit more motion to his game in the power play, and I think that's something that they've kind of tried to incorporate, which is something that they've really tried to buy into after all these years of really essentially being stationary. Guys being in their spots and
Yeah.
basically there's these 5 weapons on the ice and you make a penalty kill. Pick your poison. But as long as Nikita Kucherov is running this power play and just the way he sees the ice and the brilliance that he has, I think he talked in media day about he'd rather it be a little bit more stationary and it's more the pieces of the puzzle that you have. And hopefully Bjorkstrand is that guy, and maybe you do use a little bit more motion, but still kind of have those weapons in the right places, and then that can be good. And again, they were a top 5 power play unit in the regular season, but at the end of the day, they really didn't get it done in the playoffs. And in a pretty good sizable sample size there, because again, the Panthers give you a lot of power play opportunities. So I think Bjorkstrand's hugely important to that. I've already seen him in practice and in training camp how hard he's working to get to figure it out and play that role well. And again, I honestly have not seen in the time that I've covered this team as much work on the power play in practice and training camp. So it's something
Really.
they're constantly working on, and it's something that they know they've got to fix a little bit. And I think that it's something that's really going to be a focal point of this season. And again, like Kucherov said, like, let's not get it twisted here a little bit. It's like you can be a top 5 power play unit, and he was saying like we did really well against the bad teams, but there were some really good teams that we really didn't do that well against. And when you're playing in the playoffs, you've got to do it well against the good teams. So there was you look back at the numbers, and there was some truth to that too. So I think you really got to look this season at kind of like how they do against on the power play against really good teams like the Panthers, like the Maple Leafs, like some of these teams that they're going to have to beat in the postseason.
Were you surprised by that at all? That I mean, I know it was, obviously when
Mm.
you lose somebody like Stamkos that has such a big impact and power play goals and defense has to account for him and created a lot of space and stuff. But were you surprised that Cooch really singled that out as the biggest thing that they needed to improve? Because they all were a
No,
top 5,
yeah. I was a little surprised he said it, but I can tell the frustration. I watch him in
Yeah.
practice every day.
Yeah.
I see how hard he works. It's a little bit tough with Cooch because he he's
He
such a brilliant
creates
player,
everything, right?
right? And he
He
creates
creates everything.
everything, and everything comes off his stick, right? Everything they do
Yes.
comes off his stick on the power play, and
Yeah.
and at the same time, like it's hard. It's hard to say. So like sometimes it's hard to play with him sometimes because you're not you have to think a step ahead with him. I mean, like it takes a certain. They always say it takes a certain guy to play with great players, right? And
Right,
obviously,
right.
Braden Point is one of those guys. They have great chemistry, and they know where each other is. And Victor Hedman's played with him forever. Jake Gensel. I think one of the great stories is how well Jake Gensel fit in, so quickly. I
It's
mean, he
true.
led the
Yeah.
league in power play goals. No one really talks about that. But I mean, I think I do think that Cooch was a little bit frustrated about the sense that he felt that they experimented too much with it, and maybe they didn't have the right pieces, and they just had to figure something out. I do know that he likes to be more stationary. He doesn't. I don't think he wants to do a lot of movement. I think that if you've got the right guy in the right spot, you can do it. And obviously, I think you're so used to having Stammer there, and you're so used to that being when Stammer was there. He was probably the number one thing you had to account for, right? That one timer was the number one thing you
No
had to account
question. You
for.
had to
And
shade that
so,
way. Yeah.
right. And so now, I guess the way he kind of explains it is, you know, you've got to make that area of the ice a threat. And that's
Mm-hmm.
the key. And so, obviously now they're kind of putting Point over there, and Point's a guy who, as good as he is in that bumper with the catch and shoot kind of thing, like he's a skater too. So you almost, if you put him out there, you want him to move around a little bit. You want him to kind
True.
of, create some ice for the other guys. And I think that's the thing is there is going to be a little motion because you want Braden Point to move out there, create his shot, or maybe play more towards the goal line or in the corner, move him around a little bit, and then that creates more space for Bjorkstrand and Gensel, down low, and then I think Kuch might be a little bit more happy with it because he sees how it works, and he sees,
Mm.
okay, like it's all about getting space and time on the power
Right.
play, and he's always a step ahead. He's been a step ahead on this power play for years, but it probably needs to be a little bit of a balance of both in terms of having guys having their spots, but also having a little bit of movement to it. And I think no doubt Nikita Kucherov is. I don't think Nikita Kucherov is ever satisfied with anything until he unless he wins the Stanley Cup. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's just the player he is. I think he holds himself at a high bar. He holds his teammates at a high bar, and so I think he looked at last year and he saw those numbers, and he felt it, and he was like, we've got to get better here. And I think he definitely did. I mean, he definitely worked his ass off to you know, to 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 be there, pretty much all summer. Every time I went to development camp or rookie camp or anything like that, he was on the other sheet working. So there's no doubt that he's continuing to put those minutes in, and a lot of his stuff is like he works on touch, he works on stick handling, he works on just a feel for the puck. But just watching him, on a sheet of ice by himself, or working with a couple guys in the middle of July, it's pretty pretty amazing just to see how he does it. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I was surprised how forward he was with it, but I think he's frustrated by it, and then
Yeah.
because he knows that I think everyone knows to a certain degree that, like, you have this team, you've been lucky to have this team together for this long, really, in a lot of ways, and
Right.
you want to make the most of it. And in some ways, you kind of see everyone else getting older. Like, it's no doubt. Like, Nikita Kucherov has 2 more years on his contract. And not too long of a time, we're going to have to be talking about, what is his future with his team? Does he want to stay here? Do they? I mean, obviously they want to keep him here, but that is a question as he enters his kind of mid-30s too, but is still playing obviously at a extremely high rate. But I think this is a really important. We are just kind of transitioning to that question. Is that it is kind of one of those years that, like, the guys aren't satisfied where they've been the past 3 years at the end of the year, but at the same time, this core group is getting older. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot older than it was 2-3 years ago. So I think guys are like, if anything, there is a real. I mean, a sense of urgency is overused in sports, but like, I do really think that there is one with this group, because I know the window closing is a cliche too, but I really do feel that they kind of sense, like, okay, how much more time do we have left together?
No, it's a real thing in pro sports, and
Yeah,
Cooch, like when you hear the things about what he does, whether it's 2 weeks off after the regular season, whatever, the work he puts in, he's got that, sort of like in a basketball parlance, like the Kobe Bryant,
yeah,
mentality,
no
the
joke. Yeah,
Michael Jordan. You wonder, why are these guys so much greater than everybody else? Because not only are they tremendously skilled, but they work their ass off. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, the part you don't see, every minute that he spends on the ice is a minute that somebody else is not on the ice,
Right.
and it just that's why they're so great. Which is was I thought it was a great comment by him about the power play. He was so passionate about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so uh, just real quickly, and this is not on a side. Just a minute ago, you mentioned Gensel. How underrated
Mhm.
was this guy last year?
Yeah. Yeah, he was great. I
I mean, he was
mean,
unbelievable.
yeah, I mean, what he was able to do, and again, like it's not easy playing with great players, and
Right.
Jake Gensel comes with a pedigree. He played with Sidney Crosby. He played with,
Oh yeah.
when he played in that brief time in Carolina, he played with Sebastian Aho, great players. But at the end of the day, like a part of it is that he's a great player as well. And
Yes.
there's no doubt he's. It's funny because he just fit in so well and so quickly, and
Hmm.
he played well on that top line on the point line, but he could also play and bring out the best in other guys,
Elevate
on
him.
other
Yeah.
lines when they were
Yeah.
mixing stuff up. And there's no doubt, like Coop is not a guy who sticks with, if he's got a feel for something, he's gonna move Jake around because he knows that Jake will bring the best out in other players too. So, as much as we always talked about Jake coming in being like, oh, like he plays well with great players, like he's a great player that brings other
He
guys along
elevates
too.
guys. Yeah. Hmm.
And the way that he has, you know, I think it's really, I think the most exciting thing about the next couple of years for the Lightning in a lot of ways is the fact that you have two guys playing together in Gensel and Kucherov that just see the game on an entirely different level
Differently. Yeah.
than
Hmm.
other guys do. And
Hmm.
and you can tell that they have a little bit extra in terms of hockey IQ,
Hmm.
and that they just and that they also get each other in a lot of ways, and they did that pretty quickly. So, I think having those two guys together is something to be really excited about. And again, like the way they see the ice, the way they're able to be in the right spots at the right time, almost thinking a step ahead. And like again, like Jay Gensel wasn't a guy that really came in with like these great like power play numbers. Hey, he was a really good power play player, but like it wasn't like he was scoring 15, 16, 17 goals a game in the power play, but he really fit in really well in that group. And in 5-on-5, he's a great two-way player. And yeah, I don't think that he got talked about enough last year in terms of what really made this team a lot better last year. And because he probably does get lost a little bit on that top line, even though I think people who watch this team on a daily basis know how good he was and how great and smart a player he is. So, like I said, I think that's one thing that fans should be excited about is him and Cooch having another year together,
Yeah.
and now knowing each other. That they don't have to really get used to each other.
Yeah, huge acquisition, and the year two is
Yeah.
going to be so much better. All right, let's talk. I got a couple Florida questions for you because we
Yep.
can't really close this out without talking about the Panthers. So they're bringing everybody back, right? Although Barkov is out for the regular season and Kachuk is out until what mid-season or so.
Yeah.
How do they get over this hump? I mean, I like I said, I think the Panthers for what 3 years had to figure out how they were going to get past the Lightning, and now
Right.
it's sort of turned a little bit. So what are going to be the keys to this? This rivalry, if you will.
Yeah, I think some of it is some of it is like timing and some of it's momentum, right? I mean, I think that
Hmm.
you can look back on the series last year, and if
It's
so
so
much stuff
much
happened in
closer
game.
than that than the
Yeah,
way it ended
and
up.
so
Yeah,
and so much stuff happened in game 4. I mean,
right, right.
the Hagel hit, the Ekblad hit on Hagel, and everything that kind of matriculated through that. Obviously, both teams were going at each other the whole series, right? From game 1 on,
Oh
it was
yeah,
back and forth. But that happens. The Lightning take a lead. The 12 goals by the 12 seconds that Florida scores 2 goals late to win game 4. The Lightning are not far away from taking that series back
sure.
to to Tampa, tied at 2. At the end of the day, I mean, Vasy said in game, on media days, you've got to play better at home. you know, and that's not just against the Panthers; it's against anyone in the playoffs.
Yeah, the
You fight
playoffs. Yeah,
if it matters to get home ice advantage in the playoffs, you got to use it, right? And
yeah.
and just kind of that find a way mentality that the really great Lightning teams had. You could go into any playoff game in 20 and 21 and 22 for the most part, and they could be not play their best game and go into the third period down a goal or even
Mm-hmm.
two or a tied game, and they would just be a team that you just thought they would pull it out. They were the findaways, and
Mm-hmm.
the Panthers have kind of, and they did it to the Panthers. I mean, like, one of the biggest memorable goals that I've watched covering this team was, I think, Ross Colton's goal in game two and 3 seconds left in Sunrise, and in that series, and I think it was 2022, I think. And that put that the Panthers had won the President's Trophy. They were riding high, and the Lightning took the first two games in South Florida, and they pretty much put them away. They swept them that year, and so it's little things like that, and finding a way, building momentum. I think a lot of it is mental right now. I think that even stuff that we saw last week between the teams, plays a big role into it. I think I wrote this today for the Times, is that I do think that one thing that the Lightning didn't do in this offseason in terms of improving was really getting kind of a guy who was going to protect his teammates, and protect in the sense of you know there's no doubt that this is a team that's tough, and there's no doubt that there's a team that wants to defend each other, that they will defend each other in terms of their teammates, but really have one of those guys who is going to stop the other team from pulling stuff, from from going after guys, who's going to, if you do it, you're going to pay the price.
Right.
And I think that's one thing that they kind of lacked in the postseason. And ever since Pat Maroon left, to a certain degree, and to some degrees, like guys like Bogosian and Corey Perry, guys like that, who would just, make life hell for you if you tried to mess with one of their players, right? And they really don't have those guys. And I think, a couple of days ago, they made a waiver claim for this big 6'9" guy named Curtis Douglas from Utah, and he's 6'9", 240, and I've seen some of his fights, and he's got reach, and he can put guys away. So that's a guy, just by having him on your roster, having him in your lineup, he can be that guy. He's never played an NHL game yet, but he does fit a role for this team. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, he's got to be a guy who helps you win games too, right? He can't just be this guy who's just gonna, you know, pull, fight, right? So he's got to do the other stuff to help you win games, to play on a fourth line or something like that. But if he is, like, they could conceivably have a fourth line that has, Curtis Douglas at 6'9", uh, Jack Finley at 6'6", and Connor Geeky at 6'4".
Oof.
And I don't know if they've had that kind of size in the bottom six, that in recent years. And so over the past couple of years, they've had this transition of getting, like, from going to those guys like the Maroons and Perrys and Belmars and guys like that. They've gotten younger, they've gotten faster, they've probably gotten a little bit better, in terms of 5-on-5 play, and better defensively. But they have given up a little bit of that physicality that they used to have during some of those seasons. And I think, you know, they got a wake up call, I think, last week with some of the stuff that happened. And I think, they're moving forward with kind of trying to figure out, like, we do need to be physical. We don't want to sacrifice the skill and what we do well and everything like that. But the Panthers play a different way. And again, like, the Lightning teams were tough when they were winning. They were great, but at the same time, like, the Panthers have kind of taken it to another level.
No question. And I don't know, what the NHL sees or what they do about it, but
Mm-hmm.
that Tampa Florida rivalry is one of the best in hockey, but maybe not for all the right reasons. So what
Right.
happened in the last two preseason games? I mean, you can't just dismiss it out of hand. Now, they don't play their first match is not until November
Right.
15th in Sunrise, but this has to carry over right into the regular season, or will they be more mindful of, we can't get sucked into their style of play and let it beat us?
Yeah, well, I think the Lightning were willing to, like, put everything from last postseason behind them in that context. I mean, like, when you look at it,
Yeah.
it was so back and forth. It was like, I think who was is like Kachuk goes after Kucherov in game one. Obviously the Hagel hit on Barkov in game two, but then Kachuk tries to go after Gensel in game two as well. You know, there's the Ekblad hit
Oh,
on Hagel that knocks him out of the game and stuff like that. So it was so back and forth, and, like, neither team was innocent by any means. I think, but I talking to Brandon Hagel long before this, like, we're in the beginning of training camp. I asked him, like, do you think this is going to carry over? And he's like, I don't think it is, because I think our focus has to be on beating them.
Winning, yeah.
And the playing better hockey than them. And at the end of the day, that they might be our big brother now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I believe in that context. Now, Brandon Hagel is an emotional guy in the heat of the moment. Who knows, right? But I honestly think that that's the way he felt going in. But obviously, the AJ Greer hit on Hagel on Thursday night starts a
Ugh.
whole different thing. And it is a little bit bewildering to a certain degree how the league has handled it, because you know what the Lightning did the other night on Saturday, it was messed up. I mean, like, they brought in what I call the Syracuse Six now, and like a bunch of guys who, very, for the most part, especially guys like Scott Saber and Roman Schmidt, were just brought up to to throw punches, and
Yep.
to take
Yep.
guys out. Right? There
Yep.
was no doubt about it. To be honest, I think that's why John Cooper got fined. I think that the league has John Cooper on a pedestal. He is the most well-respected coach in the game. He is a future Hall of Famer. He is one of the voices of the game right now. He is going to coach hockey, Team Canada in the Olympics in a couple months, and they're like, you can't be doing this. Now obviously you could the Lightning can say, well, what happened Thursday, there's no way we're putting our good players on the ice on this game because we're going to
Right. Why
protect
would
them.
we subject
Right?
him to that
Why would we
punishment?
put
Yeah.
why would we put Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, and Jake Gensel on the ice? Right? They
Right.
can say
Right.
that. And again, I think that's valid in its own context.
It
Now,
is.
when they announce some of these suspensions, they're like, well, we took into consideration previous incidents of the between these teams. And you know I think that's tough if you're not going to do anything against the Panthers,
You
right? If
had
you're going to
no
do
action
that
against
and do
Florida, which
nothing
has
against
been
the
the
Panthers,
instigator of the
right?
entire. I mean,
Right?
look, they play a style of hockey. That's fine, right?
Right?
But don't tell me if we're going to start finding coaches, maybe look to the Florida bench too,
Right?
at some point.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the tough part. It was tough to, and some of the explanations that I got, from sources in the league were like, you have to look at it in time and place. And what the Lightning did was
Yeah.
messed up, right? And I can
Yeah.
understand that, but if you're going to say that you're looking at everything, you can't say that you can't do anything. You're not going to do anything to the Panthers. Like, I don't know what
Right.
that is. I don't know
Right.
if they should get fined or whatever. But even if you're not going to do anything to AJ Greer, after the fact, that was what started it, right? But if you're going to
Right.
look at this
Right.
whole thing, you got to look back on again on Matthew Tkachuk's hit on Nikita Kucherov in Game 1. Like, you've got to look at it all. I mean, you can go back years if you want to. When you look at it, I mean, I think last year was it really got really back and forth, between the teams. I think we saw a different level last year that, that we thought could carry over into this year. Whether I thought it was going to carry into the sixth preseason game, I don't think I necessarily thought that this would happen. But
Right.
again, like, if you're not going to stop them, they're going to keep doing it, right? And so at the end of the day, I
Well,
think that's what's so surprising about it. I understand why the Lightning got fined, and I understand why Cooper got fined. I understand that, but I just don't understand why the Panthers got nothing, and it says like, so it looks like they're just this innocent bystander, and they're not. I mean, like, I don't think anyone would tell you. And if anything, this is putting, the Lightning team that, like, for years, everyone hated because they were 18 million over the cap, and won COVID cups and everything like that. Now everyone around the league is like siding with them. It's like everyone against the Panthers. So who knows how that all plays out? But again, like, November 15th can't come any sooner, because that's when they're going to meet again in Sunrise in the regular season, when it really, really, really matters. But there's so much of it that's perplexing. There's so much that's fascinating. Like I said, I love this rivalry. I think it's gotten a little bit out of hand with what's happened the past week. But hopefully, I mean, at the end of the day, too, they're the Department of Player Safety. So they're about
well,
the
that's the
safety of the
thing. You guys are
players.
all on the
You know,
same union, like take
yeah,
care of each other for God's sakes,
right. I mean, the way I think about it, and this is something I'm going to write later, it's like I think of guys like Zemgus Girgensons, who is the only guy out of everyone who got hit the past two games who's going to be start the season on IR. And this is a
Yeah.
guy who, he's not making $5 million. He's making pretty much the league minimum.
Right.
And over the past 2 months, he's had Florida Panthers players run his head into the wall twice.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you think like, is that player safety? So yeah. So I think a lot of different ways on it, and we probably talk about it for a few hours. And honestly, watching the game live and in Sunrise on Saturday got me super emotional because I'm like, what am I watching here? And it's like again, like I was mad at the Lightning too. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, like both teams are taking part in this. So
Yeah.
you know.
No,
But
it's a
anyway,
they have that style regardless of who they play, and they
yeah,
bring out sometimes the worst in the Lightning, but it's a hell of a rivalry, and these are the last, these are the teams that have been in the Stanley Cup every year for the last
yeah,
6 years.
yeah.
So you understand what's at stake here. Eduardo, I can't thank you enough. It's the Ottawa Senators at the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's of course on Thursday, which we look forward to at Benchmark International Arena. How many times have you written that in your story lately?
I have it in auto paste right now
Good
because it's
luck.
too long. It's
Form
too dang long,
formerly,
man.
yeah, the BIA or something like
Yeah.
that. You can read them in the Tampa Bay Times and on tampabay.com. Great talking to you, buddy Cop. Have a great season. It's one game at a time. Don't look all the way down the line. Just, week, day to day, man. Day to day.
Day to day. We're all day to day, buddy cop.
Yes, we are. Indeed. Thanks, Eduardo.
All right.
Can't wait for this opening day. It's going to be great. NHL season is here. This is one of my favorite times of year. You got Major League Baseball playoffs. You got the NFL now into its second month, and the start of hockey season. Everything going at the same time. It's going to be great. So look forward to that. The Bucks will be back at practice preparing for the San Francisco 49ers. We'll bring you the latest on what we got going there. And as always, go see our friends at Breitling Boutique International Plaza Mall. That's where you're going to find the best Swiss watch timepiece you've ever owned. Trust me, you want to go in there, you want to talk to those folks, spend some time, have a drink, let them tell you about all the different watches that will suit your needs or those of your wife or your girlfriend. It's Breitling Boutique, International Plaza Mall. Make sure you let them know you heard about it right here on Sports Day Tampa Bay. For Steve Versnick, my thanks to Eduardo Encino. I'm Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times. Have a great day, everybody.